Mr. LonerBox, hello.
Hello, Mr. H3.
I can see you. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yeah, I hear you and see you. Actually, you're a bit quiet. Let me turn you up.
Excuse me. Thanks for calling in. I know it's super late. What time is it there right now?
Oh, it's only 11, and
Oh,
I'm a
that's not
bit of a
bad.
night owl, so I'll manage it.
And you're in Scotland, right?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please, yeah.
So obviously violent resistance is like not the the optimal option. But when people are not being given aid and they're being how do you propose peaceful resistance when they don't have resources to do anything at all right now?
I'm guessing you're talking pre-October 7th, is that right?
No, I'm talking post October 7th.
Oh, for people in Gaza.
What do people propose is done right now? Because it's been a year. Like how can resistance be shown, or like what else can people do to get this? Because you were saying like people talk about it a lot, like the plight is talked about enough, but like when is it not talked about enough to when like all of these people are still dying? Like when is enough?
I don't think people should stop talking about it. I guess it's just, when you're saying what kind of peaceful resistance, are you talking about people in the West, or are you talking about people in West Bank or Gaza? I'm not sure the question was.
She's saying that what other option? Well, it's going to happen basically, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah.
Like how do we
Obviously,
move forward?
shouldn't.
It shouldn't happen. We don't condone of it, but what?
And especially if you want to send aid there, and people are scared that the aid will go to Hamas, which is I understand. Obviously, like there is a threat there, but if you fear that it'll be going to what do you do to supply aid to the innocent civilians who have been dying and are dying?
As far as I know, with international law, at least, like if you're the occupying power, you have to make sure that aid can get in. I think the American government, I don't know if you know, recently there was like a measure that was taken in October for 2 weeks, where Israel basically, the IDF, I think without getting approval from Central Command, basically decided that they were going to surround the north of Gaza. And to do that operation, they weren't going to let anything in. Okay. So they did that for about 2 weeks. And then I think that was when Kamala Harris came out and said, okay, you've got 30 days to fix this. Otherwise, we're going to reconsider selling arms to Israel. We're going to reconsider our position on aid. And that's a pretty unprecedented thing for America to do. America doesn't talk about reconsidering arms to Israel very often. And then on the very next day, Kogat, the Israeli aid distributor agency, basically posted a bunch of videos saying, look, there's a bunch of trucks going into North Gaza. We got a bunch of trucks going in. So I think getting government pressure to Israel actually does go a long way. I think it actually did get them to reverse. And although I think the final verdict from America was that Israel still could have been doing better, that they had at least they stopped what would be the equivalent of like a medieval siege, because that's what it was for those 2 weeks in October. So I think the problem is like, I think people are just very disproportionate with the ways that they make complaints. And then when you get disproportionate and when you exaggerate or when you throw in false things, then you don't really know where the solutions are. So for the last year or so, when people have been saying there's an inevitable famine, and like a famine is like you've got thousands of people dying of starvation like every other week. And obviously that didn't happen. But it means that people kind of like skip over what the actual issue is, because what should have been happening, I think, and what I think could have happened more from America was more pressure on Israel to actually facilitate the movement of aid throughout Gaza. Because the big problem is that, like aid agencies don't really want to go to certain areas because they're too dangerous. Sometimes places will be so lacking in aid that when they do send a convoy in, it gets rushed and then people get shot. So it's like, I think that's probably, it's like when you assess it proportionately, I think you can come to answer it a lot more easily.
I think your question is more like people in Gaza, right, who have no access, they have no means, they can't, I mean, they're basically just like totally right, in every conceivable way. You're wondering, like, how do they resist?
Yeah, and how does this whole new generation of children like not become?
I'll say for you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Like it feels like it, sadly inevitable. Like all of these people, their entire existence will now be based on the fact that their like friends and family have been massacred and their homes.
Yeah. Sorry, I get what you're saying now.
Yeah, like how do you stop
that's a really hard question. So I think the only thing is like maybe 5 or 6 months ago, maybe a bit less. I think American intelligence agencies were basically in agreement that Israel has achieved almost everything they can militarily by now. Like the only thing they can do left is like, they go to an area, they take out the Hamas guys, and then they leave, and then Hamas tries to regroup. but they're regrouping with less resources. There's more buildings destroyed. So Israel goes in again, and it's like a diminishing return, and they're just going to weaken and weaken and weaken until there's just nothing left. But I think the only thing that can really happen for Gaza is, and this has been floated around since the summer, is that there needs to just be like a certain, like starting with one area at a time, of taking a zone that the IDF has been able to clear Hamas out of, and to just find whatever agency or any body in the world that isn't Israel, that isn't Hamas, can come in there and start to rebuild. And obviously Netanyahu, because he's a piece of is obviously not really interested in pursuing that option by now. But I think that's really the only thing that can happen. Like, there's no future in Gaza with Hamas. There's no future with Hamas, because if they stay, they're going to do the same thing again. They're going to rearm, they're going to rebuild, and they're going to try attack Israel again, and then Israel will respond, and then you'll get the same situation again, and more people die, and more people get radicalized. Like, yeah, they're a very self-perpetuating organization. And there's also not really, I think, anything happening with this current Israeli government. They either need to get kicked out by the locals, or they need to have a lot of pressure on them from the rest of the world. And I think with Trump coming in, that's not very likely, but I think that's what should happen. Whether we get there, I don't know.
Do you think that Bibi is like a war criminal?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's quite clear. In the beginning, do you know Bob Woodward, the guy who wrote that book, the journalist who wrote that book about behind-the-scenes conversations between politicians? Yeah. There was one bit in there where on October 7th, until about the end of the month, there was a complete shutdown of aid going into Gaza. And the argument I heard at the time, because when I was in Israel, I met a couple of Israeli propagandists, like government propagandists, and they said that, like, oh, that only happened because there were a bunch of breaches in the border, some crossings were damaged, and you had to rebuild that to make sure and organize passage with the aid organizations so that we could actually make things function properly. But it turns out that behind the scenes, they had solved that problem, but Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, mostly Netanyahu, were insistent on keeping the border blocked, which is a war crime. Like, it doesn't matter if you're not obligated to give them anything yourself. Like, if you're an occupier, you're not obligated to be the one that buys the food and brings it there, but you are obligated 100% to allow aid to pass through there. You have to do that. And if you deny that, which it seems like Netanyahu did knowingly, and complained to Biden for pushing back against it, that's a war crime. That's a pretty grave war crime. Yeah.
It's such a shame that the government in Israel right now is so not just even Netanyahu, but like the whole coalition is just
Yeah, and it doesn't really help that he's somehow managed to push his approval ratings up again because of the military successes against Hezbollah and
I noticed that too.
Sinwar.
I noticed like people in Israel were like mega anti Netanyahu, and it was specifically after the pager attack, I feel like that the public was like, okay, maybe we can keep the war going with Bibi or something. I don't know.